just because we want to, we're going to tackle, I'd say, the biggest, the meatiest one first. Just, because it's what you guys are all here for, right? So we're going to tackle the biggest, baddest 1099 of all first. You're going to say, why do you say that? So we're going to go through each of these boxes and talk about what has to go in those boxes, and maybe you'll even realize things that maybe you're putting in the wrong spaces. So the 1099 miscellaneous that we know and love, right? Here is the red line form. So this is the one that gets sent to the IRS. What goes in all these lovely boxes they've created for us? So some of them are pretty, straightforward. So we're only going to touch on this once for some of these. The payer, this is the company that's doing the payments. You want to make sure that that's done without special characters. It's neat and typed, and these are machines that are reading these if you're sending them by paper, if you're not doing them electronically through the FIRE system. In some of these, like the payer's federal ID number, the recipient's ID number, their name, their street address. A lot of this you want to make sure it fits in the box properly, that it's going to scan really well. But here's where a lot of the similarities change. So you can kind of say with all 1099s, well, a lot of this follows along a pretty logical pattern. Most of them have at the top void or corrected. So if you're sending out, a lot of them are like, you'll have two. And in the example of the 1099 miscellaneous, you may have two on a page. If one of them is messed up and it's marked void, they don't want you to leave it out. Just mark it void, and the computer goes, okay, well, we'll disregard this one. Or if it's corrected, they know that's superseding, that's replacing one. At the end of this, we'll talk about how to make corrections. So this is kind of the similarities between all forms. After that moment of time, that's where all the similarities end. So now we'll be talking about just the 1099 miscellaneous. What makes it different and what goes in all these lovely boxes? The 1099 miscellaneous is the most common one. For most organizations, for most individuals, whoever it is, it may be the only one they will ever touch and the only one they will prepare and file. So after reporting these basic demographics, which kind of are same to same, you'll notice here there's a kind of a newer box. If this is, maybe you're old school and you've done 1099s before, the FATCA filing requirement is a newer box. This checkbox is used if you're a U.S. payer reporting on a 1099 miscellaneous as part of satisfying your requirement to report with respect to a U.S. account for Chapter 4 purposes. So they even have that built in now, the FATCA filing requirement. Maybe that's the reason you're doing this reporting. But a lot of these others, okay, what's going to go in the rents box? Now, some of it you can say, there's common sense. I can say that's probably rents. Basically, you report rents from real estate over $600 in box 1. This could be real estate rentals for office space, but here's an exception. Don't report it if you're paying a real estate agent. So you're not going to do this in box 1 and report it to 1099 miscellaneous if you're paying an agent, because the agent is actually the one that's supposed to report the rent paid to the property owner instead. So there's an exception for you. Machine rentals. Don't forget, that's actually where that's going to go. Machine rentals. If all you're doing is renting a machine, it does not go in box 7. It's a box 1, machine rentals. If the rental is part of a contract, though, that includes both the machine and the operator of the machine, you got to prorate it. You got to separate it between box 1 for the equipment rental and the operator, the laborer, in box 7. Okay. You may also have an occasion for pasture or land rent. Let's say you have a farmer that's paying for use of grazing land. That's a box 1. Some of some of these are going to get obscure, but a lot of this I'm going through a lot of the instructions, which, by the way, in my manual, you have all the course information. I have links to every one of these instructions. For some really bizarre reason, again, in 2017 this happened. If you go and you search for 1099 miscellaneous instructions or 1099, it's going to pop up with 2018 information. So a lot of this throughout the course, we try to give you lots of links so you can find this information easy. Just don't worry if you see that happening. Know that it's kind of buried again for the second year, but that's what you want is the 2017 information. So some of the obscure things. Well, it also could be coin-operated amusements, if they're leased, like pinball games. That actually is a box 1, believe it or not. Jukeboxes, pool tables, slot machines, or gaming devices. In the instruction, it specifically says that's a box 1 rent. So there's a little bit more to the rent box in a 1099 than maybe you knew about until now. So you're graduated in the ranks for box 1, right? Box 2 now, if we move on, royalties. So let's say royalty if you're an author. So publishing payments made to an author. Well, that's I guess a pretty logical royalty in my mind as I look at it just from common sense standpoint. But intangibles, so let's say you have a copyright, a patent, a trade name or trademark, those all would be a box 2 royalty. Oil and gas or mineral properties. And now this is one of those occasions where it doesn't follow the $600 rule. Everything else that I've mentioned so far kind of follows that $600 rule. Okay, well, that's cool. But if it's a gas, oil, mineral property of $10, that's the threshold that goes into box 2. Here's another one of those lovely exceptions. Okay, surface royalties. They are reported in box 1 instead. Surface royalties. You're going, well, that's not a logical rent. But surface royalties are reported in box 1 instead, per the instructions. And if it's an oil gas property for working interests, those go in box 7 instead. So just, last of all, to throw one more thing at you, if it's a timber royalty made from a pay-as-you-cut contract, it's not even supposed to be on the 1099. Believe it or not, that goes over to a 1099-S, proceeds from real estate transactions. Now here I'm putting this together going, okay, that one kind of doesn't follow the logical common sense rule for me, but if it's a royalty made from a pay-as-you-cut contract on timber, it's simply a proceed from a real estate transaction, 1099-S. So this really doesn't follow the normal pattern. But for the most part, if you're saying, okay, I get it, royalties, publishing, intangibles, even oil and gas, mineral properties, of course that one is a lower limit, $10 or more instead of $600. I kind of get now what box 2 is. Box 3, here really is the catch-all. It says other income. It's a variety of items of income, but most commonly what we're going to see in there, prizes and awards. So what do we think of for prizes and awards? Maybe it should be the fair market value of merchandise won on a game show. Maybe sweepstakes winnings. But this is as long as there was no wager involved. If there was a wager involved, it moves over to that form W2G instead for gambling. So no wager means no gambling. If it's truly a prize or an award, it's simply box 3. It could also be payments received by the beneficiary of a deceased employee. So here's one of those occasions like, what do? We have an employee that passed away and we owe them a little bit more money. It is actually supposed to be, and this is one of those weird exceptions again, it goes into box 3 if it's paid to the beneficiary of a deceased employee. Taxable damages, that could also go there, unless it's back pay damages. That's treated over on the W2 side, but taxable damages could be paid in a box 3. Indian gaming profits, that's specifically covered as one that's under box 3. So 3 really is kind of this catch-all thing going on here. Medical research study payments, so if they're paid for a medical research study, that's a box 3. How about termination payments to self-employed insurance salespeople? We'll talk about one of those really obscured but very specific rules. If it is a termination payment to a self-employed insurance salesperson, that goes into box 3. Foreign agricultural workers on an H-2A visa, and of course any of those accounts reported under the FATCA filing requirement. These are all that other income. So truly, when we say other, it is absolutely a catch-all when you think of all those little obscure things that they've defined that should show up in this box 3. So there's a lot more to the world of the 1099 miscellaneous. On box 4, it says federal income tax withheld. Okay, seems straightforward. It's just basically backup withholding amounts. And by the way, we get it really in depth into backup withholding in the part 3 of this course, so I'm going to just touch on it briefly. But if you really want to know more about backup withholding, that's a lot of that's going to be covered under part 3. Here's where it's going to show up on your 1099 though, box 4, federal tax withheld. So any other types of payments you've taken out those taxes on, you want to make sure that it's showing there, or the person's not going to get credit for the fact that it was withheld and paid in. Box 5, fishing boat proceeds. And it may not be that you've encountered some of these. In some of them, maybe you're in a part of the country where you see this commonly and you're like, yeah, I know that one. But in box 5, fishing boat related income has no minimum threshold. So it doesn't matter. We don't have that $10 threshold. We don't have a $600 threshold. This is one truly that we're saying, okay, if it's $2, not that, we expect it to be $2, it's going to show up in there. It's generally for fishing proceeds where the organization considers a worker self-employed. This could be the share of proceeds from the sale of a catch or possibly the fair market value of a distribution in kind to crew members that's maybe normally less than 10 crew. So they have this pretty well defined, what should fall in this box. And of course, I'm just looking at the 1099 miscellaneous instructions is where all this is coming from. Additionally, if they have a cash payment of up to $100 per trip, this contingent on, let's say, a minimum catch, or it's paid for additional duties. So maybe if there's something in their agreement that says, the cash payment's up to $100 a trip and it's somehow tied to like a minimum catch, it's going to be here if it's traditional for the industry. So that's the other part of, I guess, the catch-all here. You're not supposed to report any amounts here, though, that are wages that are supposed to be on the W-2. So fishing boat proceeds, it's areas where the organization considers them self-employed. It's proceeds from the sale, maybe the fair market value of a distribution to crew members. So this is for those specific situations. Otherwise, if they're truly treated as an employee, it shouldn't be showing up here to begin with. And that holds true for everything. If somebody really is an employee, they shouldn't be showing here on the 1099 to begin with. So moving on to more of these fun boxes. Box 6 says medical and healthcare payments. What are those? Well, it's over $600, first of all. And this is one that we say also doesn't matter if it's a corporation. If they have it, you got to send this out. But at least it's a $600 threshold. It could be a physician or a supplier or provider of healthcare services. It also may include insurance payments. And in this case, corporations, like I said, they're not exempt. We still have to, even if it's a corporation, give this to them. Could be including drugs or injections or dentures or other devices if it's included in their payment. So rather than separating them out, the whole entire amount's reportable. But here's one of those weird exceptions again. If you have a payment to a pharmacy for just prescription drugs, you don't have to report it in there because it's mostly trying to catch the services part. When a physician or supplier of healthcare services is being paid, they want it in this box. So they deem a pharmacy, because they're only selling prescription drugs, not to be a supplier of services. But if the drugs are included in maybe that physician's overall payments, then it does go in here and you don't separate them out. So that's a little bit about what the box 6 is used for. Then the favorite of everybody, right? Box 7. It's the most commonly used box on the 1099 miscellaneous. In fact, it's so commonly used, if it has to go in box 7, we have a different due date. Anything else in this whole entire form, as long as it doesn't show up in box 7, you actually have until February 28th to report it to the IRS, or even until April 2nd if you do it electronically. However, if it's in box 7, you only have until January 31st. Electronic, paper to the recipient doesn't matter. It's all due by January 31st. So don't fall outside of that box or they will penalize you. So that's just letting you know. Box 7, that's the one that does that for us. It's a variety of payments. It's what's going to occur. Excuse me. 1 second there. Goodness. Too much talking, I guess, today, right? All right. So wide variety of payments. That's all that box 7. Non-employee commissions. Get this. Accountant or attorney fees. Other professionals. Non-employee bonuses. And I laugh at that because it's like, what, they don't trust accountants and attorneys to report their income properly? Apparently not, because that's one that shows up regardless of the attorney or accountant being a corporation. It gets to show up in the box 7. Also, they're not so much worried about the $600 threshold does work at least, but they want to know. Non-employee bonuses, director's fees. Remember, that's one that is covered statutorily by law that says if you're paid as a director, it shows up here, box 7. You also have non-employee mileage or expense amounts, along with most any other kind of payment made which doesn't fit into category for another box on the 1099 miscellaneous or another 1099 form. So here I just another reminder, if there's any amounts reported there, the 1099 and the accompanying 1096 forms will have to be furnished to the IRS by January 31st instead of that later due date. So it's also the 1096. Don't forget that that's one of them. So box 7, the lovely box that is for non-employee, it's your independent contractor, it's attorneys and accountants. And I always get that, well, wait a second, what do you mean attorneys? There's a separate box that says attorneys. We'll cover that in just a second. If it's a normal payment to an attorney, an accountant, a non-employee contractor, box 7 is going to be almost always where those show up. Box 8 is substitute payments in lieu of dividends or interest. This is payments of at least $10 received by a broker for a customer in lieu of dividends or tax-exempt interest as a result of a loan on customer securities. So you can say, well, maybe in most businesses, that's not exactly a common thing because maybe they're not a broker, they're maybe not, loaning out customer, there's no loan on customer securities, but some of this is we have to look at from the other angle and say, okay, we may not have to report on a 1099, but it's good for us to also know what should be in there, because when I'm doing preparation of returns, I'm often asking my taxpayer, okay, this is what it's telling me. Is that what you understood it to be, or is this right? Because it could be that person reporting this 1099 doesn't know the rules and is doing things wrong. So it doesn't hurt to understand what all these rules are for sure. So moving on to all these other little ones, box 9, it's just a checkbox. It's used when the payer makes a direct sale of $5,000 or more for resale. This is just a checkbox. It's an X. It's no dollar amount. And it may also be used in conjunction with something reported elsewhere. Let's say in conjunction with box 7. Let's say that box 7 says $15,000 and it has an X here. It just means that there's a direct sale of at least $5,000 or more for a resale. So it's just an interesting little checkbox there is what that is. Box 10, another very specific use. Crop insurance proceeds of $600 or more paid to farmers by insurance company, unless the farmer notifies the insurance company that the expenses have been capitalized under Section 278, 263A, or 447. So there's like an exception to that. If the farmer notifies the insurance company that they're capitalizing expenses under those code sections, then it shouldn't show here. So again, it's one of those just kind of alerting you, even if you're not reporting crop insurance proceeds, but maybe you are helping in the insurance company and they're like, oh, what do we do with this? Then you know where that's going to show up. A couple other obscure ones. Box 13, that's just for reporting excess golden parachute payments. Box 14, gross proceeds paid to an attorney of $600 or more. This is actually the most common mistake that I see here, because you're going, well, by default, maybe our client is paying an attorney for legal services and the temptation is to put it in box 14. Remember I said earlier it's box 7. So what in the world would box 14 be used for? What if there is a settlement and the attorney is receiving 100% of those proceeds from that settlement and then turning around and paying out other folks? That's actually what they mean, gross proceeds paid to an attorney. It is not our common way of thinking of, oh, this attorney was paid this amount for some legal services provided to the client. Those are always box 7. And I just point this out because I truly see it in practice. That is the most common mistake I see. So in the case of, let's say that case is all finalized and there's a big payout or a settlement and it's paid to the attorney, and then the attorney turns around and pays that out to a client or somebody else. Now, they may have a reporting requirement to then issue out a 1099 themselves to whoever they're paying out, but that's the occasion that it shows up in box 14. So I did want to point that out because it is unfortunately a common mistake that we see, and it's just it's not really understood well, because you read if you read it verbatim, then you go, oh, paid to an attorney, gotcha. And it's not really intuitive that box 7 just says non-employee compensation. That's actually where that ends up going. A couple other little small things for you. If we look at 15A, it says Section 409A deferrals. Well, okay, that's going to be a very specific one. The funny thing is, and this kills me, they have this box. It has the instruction. It says, however, you don't actually need to complete this box. It's like, well, why do they have it there? So if you're curious, if you think you have somebody that falls along this, there's a special notice 2008-115. I have a link in there. You can follow that and it says, well, here's this box, but you actually don't have to fill it out. Okay. Box 15B is reporting Section 409A income. So it does indicate, however, anything reported in here is also supposed to be duplicated and includable in box 7. So any of these that you think might apply to you, if you have some 409A income, definitely look up the instructions. It's going to give you a little bit better guidance for that. 16 through 18, that's reporting state information when necessary. And now we're seeing the states. We already know the IRS has a matching system in place. The states are starting to catch up to that. So we're starting to see that happen more and more. So if your state's one that's requiring, and it's definitely, if there's state tax withheld, you got to make sure you put it on here, or the state's never going to know that taxes were taken out and paid in. But some of them may require like a state ID number and state income, even if there isn't state tax withheld. So do at least be aware of that as you're working in with information for your states. So just like I promised, right? The 1099 miscellaneous has tons of information with it, but this is just this one slide is the recap of it all.